Welcome over to the Week 18 edition and our final podcast of the season here with Jake and Joe, getting you set for the waiver wire pickups. Hopefully, you're not in leagues that are at this point. I know that there are certain areas that we say we can't say that, or certain formats or media conglomerates that RotoWire participates in. That's not one of them. Guys, if you're in a Week 18 league, unless it's just for point totals, try to find a situation where you're not dealing with what we're going to go over today, which is a number of people possibly on bye, maybe not playing their starters for a very long time. Josh Allen, for example, is going to start for the Bills, but then possibly only make 3 or 4 plays to continue his start streak. There's a lot of those sequences and scenarios. Jake also has a great list put together of all the players that could be trying to play for incentives, whether it be records for Saquon Barkley or financial goals for teams, which we know matter a lot for those players and have mattered significantly from a DFS perspective in the past couple weeks past couple seasons. So we're going to get to all that here as we discuss everything going on in that in that area too for the Week 18 sequence here. Let's hit the music. Welcome to the Tuesday, December 31st edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Joe Bartel. You can follow me on Twitter at JB Fantasy Sports. You can follow Jake at RotoJake. This is our last podcast of the season, last podcast, of course, of the year, given it's the 31st. I am in a somber mood, Jake, if nothing else. I went 1 for 3 in my finals matchups last night. Needed Juwan Jennings to do something relative to Jameson Williams. That didn't work. Needed Amon-Ra St. Brown to outscore George Kittle by a decent amount. That didn't work too. So I'm in a sad mood. It's been very frustrating past 2 weeks from a fantasy perspective. You and I had a decent chance for a lot of NFFC auction glory and our team, which was basically just ragtagged by the end of the year. Lost CeeDee Lamb, had to deal with more flex stuff. We just got shellacked the past couple of weeks. So
that's one that definitely fizzled out. We had injuries all season long. I think I ended up playing for a handful of things this week. I got 2 titles and 2 third places, and so I'll be cool with that. Pretty happy. Some fluky stuff last night in the Monday night game. The extra point. I got a third place on an extra point miss from Moody against the guy who also started the Colts defense for -4.
Oh yeah, so, well that was another one too. Yep, that feels great.
Yeah, so we got craziness, in Week 17, but obviously Week 18 is the craziest when it comes to anything, all things fantasy football. And I always like to say, I don't know who likes me saying this, but if you're in a league that counts this week, find another league. Our stake league counts for the playoffs, or our stake league counts, for total points. And I guess I won the Madison stake league, and I go against the LA stake league for the champion. And my team has barely been strung together. I'm going to be a stake buyer despite winning the league, and but I'm also playing a guy who had Saquon Barkley and James Cook carry him all the way to the finals, and suddenly those are guys on teams that are going to be rested here. So, that's a big thing that plays into Week 18. This is why most leagues don't do it, and fortunately, I've only got one league, one last fab that I have to worry about here, and it's going to be ugly, but I will be watching Red Zone in Week 18.
So we'll do things a little bit differently than past shows. Obviously, you and I normally give our top 5 waiver wire list. We are going to do that and at least illustrate, I think, the top 6 or 7 guys that you would want to pick up. I would say reach out to us on Twitter, JB Fantasy Sports, RotoJake, if you have any specific lineup-related questions. Although we had a user just, I think, Saturday ask, plays Zach Ertz or Sam Laporta. They're down. You and I both said play Sam Laporta. Of course, Zach Ertz gets 2 touchdowns. And
Laporta scored at least, right?
Zach Ertz got like 20 more points. We probably definitely did not help that guy with analysis. So I don't know. It's not been a good stretch for me. So maybe just ask Jake, because we are also going to talk about waiver wire winners throughout the year, kind of highlight the guys that made a lot of teams successful. You might be able to get people that we talked about on the show, and also recap our over-unders, which we picked every game against the spread over-under at the start. I think it was either that last show in July or one of the first ones in August. Spoiler, one person on this show, and it's not me, did fantastic with their over-under calls. So we'll get some kudos out there as well, too. Let's first get to those top 5 waiver wire pickups. And in this case, I think it's effectively 6, but I want you to just
I've got 6 to 8 here. Basically, we're going to do this instead of running position by position for waivers. There's 6 to 8 guys that you might want to consider picking up in fantasy for the championship week here. And we're just going to run through those guys before we hit the awards and the recap type stuff here. And so that's going to be the most important part of the year. So before before I get into that, actually, I do want to say, so just kind of to set some context here, Kansas City, Buffalo, Houston, and Philadelphia basically do not have anything to play for and are going to be strong bets to rest players here. And then, of course, you have teams like the Rams, Packers, Steelers, and Chargers who are playoff locks, but they still have something to play for here. Basically, if they want to avoid matchups against your Ravens, your Lions, your Vikings, and instead play teams like the Texans or the Rams or the or the Bucks, then they'll still have something to play for. So it's really only Kansas City, Buffalo, Houston, and Philadelphia that that drains this, or that we have to watch out for here. And that kind of is good context to get me into the top of my list. And the first group of my list basically are running backs that I believe are good on teams that are going to rest their starters. So I made my number one pickup Ray Davis this week of the Buffalo Bills. He's 18% rostered. Buffalo, we have resting starters. I assume James Cook will be one of them. But in the meantime, Ray Davis has had 5+ carries in 3 straight weeks. He has, when given an opportunity, usually in blowouts, he does well. He had a 20-carry game where he got 97 yards. He had a game where he had 11 for 63 and a touchdown. So Ray Davis is there. Yes, Ty Johnson is around 2, but I think if James Cook sits, Ray Davis is most likely to carry the load. They've actually managed his load pretty well all year, and who knows, maybe they have another weapon in their pocket for the playoffs here. They're at New England, who, I mean, there is incentive to beat the Patriots. It's kind of a rivalry, and the Patriots are 27 against opposing running backs in 25 against opposing running backs in half-point PPR formats here. So for that
not
reason,
that it matters, but the Patriots, if they were to lose, clinch the number 1 pick as well. I say not that it matters because the Giants in the same scenario last week dropped that negative 4-point bomb on the highly touted defense from this guy in a penultimate fantasy championship week for a lot of folks. So yeah, I mean that's the other part of this too, that the Patriots have incentive to lose as well.
Yes, exactly. So then we get to my number 2 pickup, and it's kind of in a similar boat here, but I'm less confident because the player's not as good as Ray Davis and the situation isn't a sure thing. So I'm actually moving to Kenneth Gainwell of the Eagles, 6% rostered. He's available everywhere except for our stake league, apparently. He makes the list as well. Now, this is interesting here because the Eagles, obviously, they don't have much to play for. Saquon Barkley has a record to chase. Mm-hmm. Will they record chase with Saquon Barkley? I don't know. That's really hard to tell. It could be a situation where they do record chase, Barkley gets the record, and then Gainwell plays, the rest of the game. Maybe they mix him in. I remember there was a situation earlier in the year. I saw this clip go viral where they asked Saquon on the bench, hey, do you want to get your personal your personal single game rushing record? And he said, no, let the kids eat. He wanted to let the young kids eat. So, I mean, if that mentality holds here through week 18, and it should, right? You shouldn't play your arguably your best player to chase the record.
I disagree. It's against the team that cut him. The Eagles are playing the Giants. The Giants didn't cut him, but didn't offer. We watched that whole saga play out on HBO. We have heard some of the sequences for that. It would be absolutely easy for the Eagles to get Saquon Barkley 106 yards in the first half. Yep. And then you go ahead, because the Giants stink. They won their Super Bowl last week against the Colts, knocked the Colts out of the playoffs. And also that basically ensures Brian Daboll will not be coming back as head coach. Exactly. Like the Giants could play more competitively. I think the Eagles will try to get the record on the Giants of all teams. If it was anybody else, maybe it's different. But I think
and they'll do it with Kenny Pickett or Ian Book or
Jake McGee.
Whatever. I don't even know the guys' names at this point because they don't even make a quarterback list. But okay, so that's fair enough. The Giants are ranked 30th against the running backs in half PPR format. So there is even a situation, Saquon gets the record, they stop the game, they honor him, and in the second half, Kenneth Gainwell comes out and eats 2. This defense is bad. So Kenneth Gainwell is definitely on the radar here. And slightly a tier below, I go to a guy like Dameon Pierce for the Texans. If Houston wants to rest Joe Mixon has had an oddly healthy year, a lot of work heading into the playoffs here. So Dameon Pierce is 2% rostered. And we also throw Samaje Perine, Carson Steele into that conversation. Isaiah Pacheco is banged up. The Chiefs are a candidate to rest starters. But we've been down the road with Perine and Steele. And it is a matchup against Denver here. So it's a tough matchup. We don't know which one really gets it or how effective this offense is with Carson Wentz. Presumably Carson Wentz, right? Because, again, there's unknowns. So Perine and Steele didn't make my top 6'8", whatever you want to call it here. But, those are some names that if it comes out and we find out that Pacheco's out with the injury, Hunt is getting rested, the Pirine Steele PPR conversation, maybe Steele falls into the end zone, maybe Pirine gets you some PPR action here. So those are the guys. But really my 1-2 are Ray Davis and Kenneth Gainwell. All right. Now we move to a situation, a tier on my list where it's more like the previous shows we've done all year. Players who have either played really well or have had other situations open up. More traditional waiver wire pickups that aren't a direct result of rest speculation here. So I threw Amir Abdullah here next in the list. He's 35% rostered here. He is the clear winner over Alexander Madison here in this Las Vegas Raider backfield. He was actually, I initially had him at number 1, but he popped up with a foot injury, which concerns me a little bit. We'll have to wait and see here. But he was the man over Madison on Sunday at New Orleans. He had 20 carries for 115 yards, caught 3 or 4 targets for 32 yards. And it is a tougher matchup. They're playing at the Chargers. But again, a little bit of a rivalry game. Do the Chargers have a ton to play for? They're already in the playoffs. Maybe do seeding. Yeah, they're playing for seeding here. And I mean, the Chargers are number 7 against opposing backs in half PPR. So Abdullah could get you there. He's going to be the clear guy over Madison, and he's only 35% rostered here. So I guess there's a situation where he also makes the list.
Yeah, I think the Abdullah call is pretty good. Like if you're in a lot of these leagues where people are picking up backups already. You mentioned the Ray Davis of the world. It'd be great if Ray Davis is available. You set up a stake league for us, for example. A lot of these running backs aren't there. I know Amir Abdullah wouldn't be in our case for stake league, but he was one of those that emerged over the past 2 or 3 weeks where in reality, I don't want to, like you as a fantasy manager say, I don't want to be invested in the Raiders backfield. There's no point we'll be playing Amir Abdullah anyway, and I'm not blocking him from another opponent. So I think Amir Abdullah might be one of those that's wrong, but it's a tough matchup against the Chargers, who probably have
if you were sitting here and you had Chuba Hubbard, Alvin Kamara, James Cook get you there, all of these are very, very plausible situations. You might actually be desperate, especially if it's a 14-teamer or deeper here. So that's why these guys come up. Another guy similar boat here. That's Khalil Herbert of the Bengals. He's going to be pretty widely available at 7% here. Remember, Chase Brown, it was so awkward watching that Bengals game on Saturday because Chase Brown was going to attempt to slide and stay out of the end zone, right, to keep the clock running here for the Bengals so they could then kick the field goal instead of going, back and forth twice here at the end, which benefited me greatly with all my Burrow Higgins stacks in fantasy this year. Anyway, side note, but Chase Brown went to slide instead of just scoring. If he had just scored, he'd have been fine, but because he slid, he got landed on awkwardly, hurt his ankle, was down for quite a while actually, ended up popping back up on the sideline looking like he wanted to jump back into the game, but ultimately did not. And the Bengals do have a lot to play for. Their playoff lives are on the line here. It's a Saturday game, which concerns me a little bit about Chase Brown. But in a situation where Brown gets ruled out or he doesn't practice at all leading up to Saturday, remember the Bengals did nothing to bolster their backfield. Well, I mean, I guess they signed Zach Moss, but he's hurt. And they traded for Khalil Herbert. That was the thing they did after Zach Moss went on IR. Yeah, exactly. So Khalil Herbert's next up. Travion Williams is around, but he's a surefire special teamer. He's played one offensive snap in the last 3 weeks here. Khalil Herbert could jump right into that Chase Brown role, which means a lot of short dump-off passes and a running game that's been pretty effective here. At least Chase Brown has been effective. I don't know if we can say the same for Herbert, but Chase Brown who was a sleeper of both of ours early on in the year, turned into a very, very productive fantasy asset. If you even get 2/3 of that from Herbert, if you get half of that from Herbert, you're looking at 8-9 fantasy points here, which in week 18 is something that you might need. They're playing at Pittsburgh, which is tough. Number 12 against opposing running backs in half PPR. But again, this is a case of opportunity, maybe a little bit of skill here. But that's a guy who, again, somehow unavailable in Madison Stake League, but will be available for most of our listeners, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I think actually the Herbert play is as good as Amir Abdullah, and that's to say I think Amir Abdullah will be fine, and Herbert will be fine too with the event that Chase Brown does not play. Again, Saturday game for the Bengals, you'll likely know the status relatively early, as I think you'll know with Saquon Barkley, for example. I think that will be some national news. Like Saquon is going to play and try to get the record against his former team, or so I hope for people. That's really what this is. I hope that the NFL and the teams that are kind of in these spots will make their situations aware, because it doesn't do anyone any good. There's so much gambling implications too. If the Chiefs are like, oh, we're going to play Mahomes for 2 quarters, like, stop. Just let us know what's going on, because it doesn't really impact things other than us the consumer, the person that's like watching the product.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. All right. So next I want to get to a couple of receivers here because chances are, if you were like me and lost CeeDee Lamb for the championship game or, situations like that, there's some receivers that can help. Marvin Mims, our cover boy, we have to start with him. He's very low rostered, plays for Denver. He had a breakout week, caught all eight of his targets for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. The one thing that I'm pumping the brakes on Marvin Mims is while he has had 4+ targets every week since week 12, and while he is playing at home against Kansas City, who should be resting starters, his huge line last week came against the Bengals in that absolute shootout. We know the Bengals defense is atrocious. Yeah. They're one to target just across the board everywhere, which we'll get to that in a sec, actually. And the other thing is that his snap and his route shares didn't get any kind of major bump. Jerry notes this. He does a great job in his box score breakdown of how the receiver he didn't get some kind of huge bump in playing time to make this happen. He just happened to be really efficient with the targets he was given against a really bad defense here. So I don't know if it's necessarily fair to think he's going to have some giant bump, but he is absolutely kind of a standalone receiver here that is a possible pickup candidate. And the other one that you reminded me of, Joe, that's Olamide Zaccheaus. He had more targets than Terry McLaurin last week, 9 to McLaurin's 7. Obviously, McLaurin outsnapped him a little bit, but Zaccheaus is the wide receiver 2 here. Obviously, at this point, we all know that Jaden Daniels is good. This offense is good. And apparently it doesn't matter who the wide receiver 2 is, whether it's Noah Brown, Dynamic Brown, whatever. Olamide Zaccheaus is next up. He might actually even be higher on my list than Mims because Mims.
He is for me. Yep.
I just want to look at the list here. Yeah, Mims technically played less than half of the snaps here, and some of the stuff. The numbers seem to think that Cortland Sutton and Devon Vele will still kind of be the guys there, whereas Zaccheaus has a clear wide receiver 2 role here. So yeah, those are the 2 wide receivers here. Anything else you want to add to those?
47 fantasy points over the past 2 weeks for Zaccheaus. The Commanders still have plenty to play for to make sure they're locked in at the 6th seed, have a significantly easier opponent in the playoffs and not the number 7 seed spot where the Packers currently reside going against the Eagles if things stand the way they are. So I like Zaccheaus a lot. He definitely is above Marvin Mims for me. And I think if you were to go, let's just say hypothetically, okay, we're doing this podcast on a Tuesday, 3 running backs conventionally are going to be available come Saturday and Sunday games as flex plays or starters. If you were to say one of those 3 running backs or Zaccheaus, I'm going to play Zaccheaus as a flex role in full point PPR formats over a lot of these guys like Kenny Gainwell, for example, or just anyone that we've listed earlier. Maybe Ray Davis is the one exception because I do think the Bills will want to do well, and Ray Davis is a really good player, and I don't know what the Patriots are going to look like, but that's the one exception of these running backs. So I think Zaccheaus could be even higher, and he certainly is above Marvin Mims for me.
Yep, absolutely here. So that kind of wraps it up for running backs and receivers. I got some honorable mentions. I don't know if we'll do those or not, but the next on my list is basically your replacement quarterback. If you were relying on Mahomes, if you were relying on Hurts, if you're relying on C.J. Stroud or Josh Allen, none of those are startable this week. Those are all off the board. So you got to look at a replacement here. And I know he didn't play a great game last week. I believe that was the Christmas Day game. But Russell Wilson is down to 44% rostered, either people dropping him before or after that game. Still ended up with 17 points in my league, so it wasn't totally terrible. The rushing touchdown kind of saved it here, but they're playing the Steelers are playing the Bengals.
There you go.
And the Steelers have a division title on the line. So for me, Russell Wilson, who's also got George Pickens back, he would be the number 1 quarterback stream this week. He's technically above our threshold, but Geno Smith is 54% rostered, and you alluded to that incentives list. Geno Smith has some very big cash incentives, I believe. I got these bookmarked here. Let me see if I could. He needs 186 passing yards to get $2 million. So even though the Seahawks, I believe, are out of it now, right?
Yep, they are officially out.
They're officially out of it. West. Geno Smith can go ahead and go ball a little bit this week. So that's a possibility. I like Russell Wilson better. Drake May is only 16% rostered. He's playing Buffalo, who may be resting their starters. I like all of those guys better than, like, if you're Mahomes, unless it's 2 quarterback where you have to do this, but Mahomes goes to Carson Wentz. Josh Allen goes to Mitch Trubisky. Who knows who's going to start for the Eagles? Davis Mills maybe for the Texans. There's a lot. I know Stafford is out this week too. I would rather take Russell Wilson for sure. If you need a quarterback, you could argue that Russell Wilson tops this whole list. So that's what I'd be looking at as far as quarterbacks go. Anything else you want to add in that bit?
No, I'm with you wholeheartedly. And I guess the other bit of news that we had last Saturday was that Chuba Hubbard being placed in injured reserve. That had a pretty ginormous effect for a lot of people. One of my best ball leagues was reliant on Chuba Hubbard. The idea was, well, the Panthers are going to split the backfield between Raheem Blackshear and Mike Boone. It was Raheem Blackshear that got the opportunities over Mike Boone. Boone only, I think, only played 11 snaps and 3 total touches. But Blackshear, who is known to be a receiving specialist, I think he was either converted receiver out of college to running back or one of those that did both. Well, he didn't get any targets in that massacre by the Buccaneers. So I don't know what to think about that. I have Blackshear in Stake League, for example. Might have to play him. I don't want to really, and I would be pretty uncomfortable with the idea that the Panthers didn't want to use the pass catching specialist in an opportunity where he should have been used. That makes me very nervous too to add to that list.
Yeah, right on here. So that was another one. You could look at the Cardinals backfield. I mean, Michael Carter went back to the practice squad despite James Conner aggravating his knee injury. Maybe Trey Benson comes back. Who the heck knows? They're playing San Francisco, who's been pretty bad against opposing running backs in Week 18, but they have nothing to play for. It'd be a real dice roll to go ahead and start one of those guys. And then receivers, guys like, that we've talked about all year, Rashad Bateman, Quentin Johnson, Romeo Doubs, Demario Douglas, all of these guys might have value this week, depending on, your sitting situations here. John Mechie, I don't really know about. He led Houston in routes and targets without Tank Dell, but is John Mechie a starter now? Does that mean he sits? Who really knows here? So we threw those guys out here. As far as guys you can play, I just want to run down the list. Obviously, Geno Smith has incentives. Baker Mayfield has big-time cash incentives, as does Mike Evans. If he gets 5 catches for 85 yards, I think it's $3 million for Mike Evans.
Or something streak going, too.
Yes, and it keeps his 1,000-yard streak going. So Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans. Tony Pollard, if he comes back, he's got some cash incentives. J.K. Dobbins has some cash incentives. Cortland Sutton, MVS, if he scores a touchdown, he gets $250K. DeAndre Hopkins, if he scores a touchdown, he gets $500K. And Zach Ertz has to have he basically has to repeat last week. But Zach Ertz has 3 different $250K incentives on the line. He could make $750K in could be his final year, so get a nice little extra nest egg there. So all of those guys, maybe that makes Zach Ertz a streamable tight end. He's been right around 50% over the course of the year. And,
I think the Marquez Valdes-Scantling one's really interesting because it's not from a fantasy perspective necessarily, but if you were on any one of those pick'em entry ones or even DFS or prop bets, anytime touchdown for MVS probably is plus money. And if you're the Saints who have had nothing to play for the past month, to get one of your receivers who's helped the team in a pickle for most of this year, get an extra $250K that was cut twice throughout the season. I kind of think that one's a very interesting number.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely here. So we mentioned those. And, I didn't put on the list here, but streaming defenses if you have to. I put the Falcons home against the Panthers as number 1. They still have something to play for, right?
The Falcons, I mean, if they win, they would win the NFC South, but
exactly
they have given that away to the Buccaneers, who win the NFC South.
Yeah, Tampa Bay versus New Orleans. Again, the Saints completely
depleted. One's probably the bigger deal, I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And then the Packers are a little over our threshold. I know it's tough to recommend them after how they looked against Minnesota here the Sunday afternoon, but they are home against the Bears, and the Bears, since the coach firing and everything, have regressed considerably on offense. Caleb Williams has regressed considerably. There is nothing to play for. And the Packers are at home against the Bears. We saw what the Packers did at home against the Saints. The pass rush was not existent against the Vikings, but obviously against the Saints it was very existent. So we'll see what the heck happens there. But they're again, the Packers are among the league leaders in takeaways and have the options, the ability to get sacks, and just limit the amount of points that the Chicago Bears score. So defenses I put kind of as an honorable mention. That's a wrap for pickups. Those are all. I think I hit all the guys you might actually consider playing, barring some crazy late injury adjustment, breaking news, what have you, among one of these teams here. So hopefully that gets you enough names to consider here if you're playing for points in Week 18.
No, I agree with you. You did a fantastic job. I have sworn off trying to call what is a good streaming defense because I had touted the Colts one from a couple weeks back and sunk both my teams. I mean, I try to tell you guys that are listening, I'm doing the same advice that I'm giving out to you. So I had the Colts defense saved for this reason. Didn't necessarily lose because the -4, but certainly frustrating with that. Let's get a little bit of the financial things out of the way here with our sponsors, and we'll go first with LIV Golf. A new season of LIV Golf Fantasy is coming in 2025. You have new prizes, new ways to win, and more, all coming in this new season. Get ready to play and sign up now at fantasy.livegolf.com. Let's also get a word from Nick Whalen, our guy here at RotoWire, who's going to talk about DraftKings Pick 6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code, ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right, we're back, and again, talking with Jake Letarski, doing our waiver wire pickups. Talk about our top 6 or 8, like you mentioned, that you would theoretically use in Week 18. But now it's time to get to the league winners among positional spots.
And have a tuxedo underneath, right?
Yes.
To hand out some awards here. So just some context. What I used for this was I used NFFC ADP from July 1st through September 1st, and then I used standard Yahoo scoring half PPR through Week 17 here. So with the quarterbacks here, if you're in a shallower league, Baker Mayfield, obviously, with his career year, was quarterback 22 in drafts, so you may or may not have been taken. He finished as QB5. That's very good. I mean, obviously, that's a huge bump here. But other guys that were largely undrafted that still made their way into the top 10. Bo Nix was QB28. Guess what? He is QB8 to finish the year. Sam Darnold was quarterback 30, obviously, because you had the the rookie and was he going to play? Yeah, JJ McCarthy. He finishes QB9. You could give the award to any one of these guys here. I'm thinking probably Nix because of how he did in the playoffs, but Darnold was right there too. Honestly, this just teaches you a lesson, right? Patrick Mahomes is QB10 getting taken in the 4th round. Don't do that. Just don't do that. Don't take quarterbacks, whether it's next year you're going to be tempted to take Josh Allen, who kind of tanked in the playoffs or in the championship game at least. Killed it in the playoffs, then, a little lighter in the championship week. Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes are all going to come up as like, I take these guys in round 4, round 5 here. You just don't do it. There's always somebody. In this case, you can get your Baker Mayfield, your Bo Nix, your Sam Darnold.
Well, you have to get it correct, though. I think that's the key part, because a lot of people like Stafford. That one would have been one of those that he played well enough where you probably have to have him in your lineup, but not enough to win, like the Knicks and Darnolds. I loved Kirk Cousins entering this year. Now, thankfully, he played so bad where it was a pretty easy cut at a certain point, but you have to get it correct. I think that the bigger answer to what do you do at quarterback is just draft the running guys. So you mentioned Josh Allen. He's going to give you X amount of rushing yards. Sure. Jaden Daniels' profile is a perfect example for that. Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts both are in that spot too. People who get rushing touchdowns like Jalen Hurts get a bit more emphasized. And I think this upcoming draft class of rookies, Shedeur Sanders, for example, will be one of those that maybe there is a rushing floor that adds to it as well. There will be a lot more time to discuss draft strategy, certainly fallouts from what happened this year. But I think that's one of my bigger takeaways as somebody that was out on Joe Burrow, but like CJ Stroud. I couldn't have been more wrong in both those scenarios, but I was out on taking a quarterback top 5. And your difference makers.
I was all in on Burrow in 9-10 here.
And you crushed it.
Daniels was QB4. By the way, so yeah, your rushing things holds. Jared Goff was QB6, and his ADP was around 15. So there are other ways to get this right here without necessarily spending up on Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. But I guess I couldn't fault you for taking some of those guys. Anyway, here we can move to running backs. Quarterbacks are a little tough to do this with. Running backs were actually very tough to to do this with, because guys like Jordan Mason that looked like they'd be the early season standout weren't helping you by playoff time here. A couple guys that again maybe shallower leagues. Bucky Irving was a league winning pickup. You had to have done it earlier in the year, but he was RB 53, 162 overall, so may or may not have been off the board in your 12-team leagues. Through week 17, he was RB 16 with a big lean on the back half. By the end of the year, by the last 3-4 weeks, he had taken over that backfield from Rachaad White and was a workhorse. Played through injuries. He was a guy. For the last 2 weeks, the plan in a league that I won, the semifinals and the championships, I benched Breece Hall for Bucky Irving, and it was the right decision.
Yes.
I was lucky enough to have Jahmyr Gibbs and Chase Brown, as well. But that's just how good Bucky Irving was towards the end of the year.
Over 1,400 total yards. One of a number of really good rookies, whether it be Brian Thomas, Lab McConkey, who helped out towards it. Over 1,400 total yards. Profiled as a receiving back coming out of Oregon, and it proved to be, I think, just an overall really good player for the Buccaneers. I think Bucky Irving is absolutely the right call. Now, he wasn't available in any of my leagues to start waiver wire, so that's the tricky part. Like a lot of the expert leagues, he was one of the last picks or right around that range.
He was also one, guys that were dropped heavy. I mean, a lot of people, there were a lot of leagues where Chase Brown was on waivers by week 4.
Sure.
So maybe the ADP was higher, but he ended up getting dropped and was a league-winning waiver wire pickup. So you could throw that there. Not quite to the extent of Bucky Irving, but Tyrone Tracy also proved to be a very consistent and startable running back. Over Devin Singletary once Singletary was banged up. The Giants were terrible, and Tyrone Tracy was RB 57, 183 overall. But he's RB 28 through week 17, and he'll play again this week. I don't see why not. That falls in there. And then the last one to mention, which maybe I think I give it to, is Kareem Hunt. Obviously, he wasn't drafted at all. 296 overall ADP, RB 155, right? He's RB 30 through week 17, but remember, he didn't play the first 3 weeks. He was signed, after Pacheco got hurt, and then Kareem Hunt comes in, takes that backfield over from Pirine and Steele. And I remember the Pirine Steele.
Oh, yeah. I was on Steele.
How many leagues did I make $52 bids on Carson Steele? Because you're hoping to get that guy. When Kareem Hunt came in and took it over here, I was fortunate enough to snag him in a couple of leagues. But yeah, to finish his RB 30 in only 14 weeks of action. Well, I think technically 13 because of the bye. So RB 30 in 13 weeks. That definitely qualifies him for the title. And, if you want to argue me and say, I want to give the trophy for running backs to Bucky Irving. If you want to argue me to say he's not eligible because he was taken too many places, then I think the trophy goes to Kareem Hunt.
I think you're right. I would have went Tyrone Tracy because there's consistency, and during the fantasy playoffs, he also mattered a little bit too. But you're probably not there unless you have Kareem Hunt at certain points, or at least that was one of those guys that got you to that point.
Yeah.
And then you could have just done the handoff to a different running back de jour over the past
and
couple
I'm pretty
weeks.
sure, Kareem Hunt only had like 8 points this week, but he scored a touchdown. Yeah. And he had like 15 the week before, both with Pacheco healthy. So he wasn't killing you either,
right,
in the playoffs if you had to use him. So, that was a tough one. Receivers were actually much tougher because essentially receivers did what they were supposed to this year,
yes,
right? There was no Puka Nacua where you could pick up out of nowhere and suddenly have you be the league-winning pick. Same with running backs. There was no Kyron Williams. But there are some interesting things. I'll start with the shallower league guys. Jerry Jeudy was wide receiver 59, 136 overall. He might be too shallow, but he finished as a top 20 receiver. Darnell Mooney was another one, wide receiver 63, 152 overall. He oddly finished as wide receiver 25 in PPR leagues, which to me was very, very surprising when I looked at when it was all said and done. He wasn't winning you weeks, but I guess he was keeping you just consistent enough to string along here. And there were probably a lot of weeks that you didn't start him, whatever. But I think the one that I got to hand it to is Juwan Jennings of the 49ers. Ayuk, Debo fell off. Ayuk and Kittle had his share of injuries. Ayuk obviously out for the year and underperformed. Juwan Jennings, he was wide receiver 189, 293 overall. He did excellent. He did just okay enough to win me a title in one game. I mean, the last 4 weeks of the year, I was starting Juwan Jennings over Deebo Samuel in the
which
league
is the
where
right
I had
call.
them both.
Yeah.
You know, so that so I think Juwan Jennings is your guy. And if you happen to be lucky enough to start him during one of his 2 monstrous weeks, those were league-winning plays for real. So those guys were there. I want to throw an honorable mention to Jalen McMillan because he was probably cut at some point and then picked back up. And he won league titles here with all the touchdowns he scored in the fantasy playoffs. And as you noted, Adam Thielen could go into that group as well if you wanted to just do playoff heroes, guys that you could pick up and do. But yeah, McMillan, I know helped my brother win a title, helped a lot of people win a title. So hats
I think
off to those
Juwan
guys.
Jennings is the correct answer for the entirety of the season. If you were a scenario where you lost Rashee Rice or Stephon Diggs or Jalen Waddle was just so bad, I played Juwan Jennings over Jalen Waddle a lot pretty early on. That's one of those where Juwan Jennings gets you that spot. Wasn't fantastic here over the past 2 weeks, which is frustrating. And I think Jalen McMillan, Adam Thielen was one of those, if you didn't have IR spots, you were likely going to be able to get him off waivers, and he definitely would have also been in that Darnell Mooney category where he's not hurting you. He's getting you an X amount of floor. When you're in the playoffs, you're just trying to shoot for that floor and get those boom weeks of other guys. So I think Adam Thielen, McMillan's a great call, too, for the past couple of weeks, and Juwan Jennings should headline that list among waiver wire standout receivers this year.
Jennings for sure wasn't taken anywhere. Won you 1, maybe 2 weeks just on his own. And, I mean, he still got 13 PPR points in the title game, so definitely wasn't hurting me down the stretch there. So that's what I got for receivers. Tight ends, there are 2 answers here, guys that were taken outside of the top 24 ADP tight ends. So that lets a guy count. I mean, Jonnu Smith, tight end 4 through week 17. Dealt with some inconsistency, but he basically did what you wanted Jaden Waddle to do.
Yep.
And had some league winning weeks. I remember Thanksgiving night, we did DraftKings amongst all our friends here at the tailgate here, and I made Jonnu Smith my captain, and I won because you got to do weird stuff in Showdown, right? But anyway, made Jonnu Smith my captain and won. So although I didn't roster him in any leagues, I thought I was so confident in Kate Otten after I picked him up. I'm like, oh, I got the guy. Now I have to run up on the tight ends. Obviously not so much down the stretch, but Jonnu Smith is, I think, who gets it. But Tucker Kraft should also be in here as well. Tight end number 7 through week 17. Obviously there were weeks where he was a 0. That's the same with every tight end here. Maybe not as consistent on a week-to-week basis. That just doesn't exist at the position. But Tucker Kraft was also very much like, if you took Sam Laporta early and took Tucker Kraft or picked Tucker Kraft up off the wire in week 2 or 3, it was a 50-50 call the rest of the year, right? Which one do you actually start? And Tucker Kraft, at 275 overall in ADP. Obviously, we all thought Musgrave was going to be the Packer tight end here. Now he's back for the playoffs in a little role there. But yeah, that's it. It's Jonnu Smith. Tucker Kraft would be the runner-up here for best tight end waiver wire pickup of the year. Do we got any more reads, Joe? Because I want to toss it off to you to introduce the victory lap.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I think Jonnu Smith definitely is the right call for the waiver wire tight end of the year. And if you had the Kyle Pittses, the Evan Ingrams of the world, I was all on Pat Freiermuth. Jonnu Smith erased that outcome pretty much right away. If you caught on what was happening with the Dolphins, that they inexplicably made their offense worse, having Achane and Jonnu Smith involved to the extent they did, or maybe Jalen Miles is going to be traded this offseason. I don't know, but weird choices all around with Miami. We do have one more word from our sponsors here, Blue Wire, and then we'll be back in right after. Okay, for the video audience, obviously we're back immediately, but thanks everyone for listening along for our final ad read, at least for our show of the year. We'd be remiss not to circle back to the over-unders that we talked about at the very beginning of the year. Our final podcast before we discussed the top waiver wire pickups pre-week 1. Jake and I pick every over-under for every single team. We've done fairly well. I think we've been at least close to 500, if not.
We had a couple good years, and then I had a couple years where we were right around 500 here. So not hurting the listeners tremendously, but not helping a ton. That is until this year.
Well, I definitely hurt the listeners. My best bets, I was 1 for 3 on. The only one I got correct was the under on the Titans, and I did say I liked the Titans as one of the worst teams in the league, and it was like plus 220 for under 4.5 wins, which the Titans are going to comfortably clear. But otherwise, I was about 500. It was a miserably bad year in a lot of different ways for me. Jake, however, is sitting here right now with the potential ending week 18 to be 28-4. 28-4, picking the over-unders based on our show back in August. That is absolutely incredible. Now, I am allowing this to be 28-4 because technically I single-handedly talked you out of taking the Commanders over. You inexplicably got that one correct. And I teased you and chided you so much that you ended up taking the under. I'm not allowing that. That will count as a correct answer for you right now. So if we're doing this legitimately, you would technically 27-5. If the Texans were to win, you're 27-5. If the Texans were to lose, it's 26-6. Regardless, insane over-under call for you. Every one of your best bets, not only clear, but clear by like week 13. You were very, you had one of the best years we could possibly recount on the show, or any other show, I think, for that matter, doing this kind of content.
Yeah, you'll be hard pressed to find anyone else that does this, and I promise you, I will never do this again. I mean, I'll try, obviously, but this is unheard of. In the betting world or in any world, period. So
the only ones you got incorrect: Vikings under 6.5. Maybe it's the NFC North biasness, but I think everyone collectively assumed that was going to be the case.
Yes, the Vikings. Nobody was getting that one right.
Vikings did fantastic
because Sam Darnold news had already happened. It was going to be Sam Darnold by the time we did this show, right?
Yeah, well, and I don't think anyone, I mean, maybe you were on a complete heater with this, but I don't think anyone assumed Sam Darnold would play the way he did here. We took under, we did, but you took under the Broncos 6.5, whatever. Credit to Bo Nixon and Sean Payton on that one. The Dolphins over 9.5. That I'm a little bit surprised that didn't happen as well too.
The Tua doesn't, obviously the injury risk is built in, right? But if Tua misses that stretch of games, things could have gone very differently.
And then the other one's the Bengals over 10.5. It got wrong. So those are the only ones you got wrong. Vikings under 6.5, Bengals over 10.5, Dolphins over 9.5.
But if anyone would have listened to me preach Burrow and Higgins along with the Bengals, then maybe maybe you still won some money out of it that way. Yeah. So and then the best bets I had the Browns under 8.5. I had the Jets over 9.5 or 10.5. I kind of said take the higher money line on 9.5.
No, you said Jets under 10.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Jets under 10.5.
Yes.
I was kind of encouraging to extend it and do the money line on Jets 9.5 too. Obviously, those all cleared. And then I did Tampa Bay 7.5. Those all cashed before week 17. So the victory laps. What I really care about is the best bets, because that's what I put money on. That's what I encourage people to put money on. The records is, I'm picking somebody because I have to. I think I said the words gun to my head 18 times in that episode. But they, the dominoes fell the way that they may. So thanks for going back and listening to it, Joe. At some point I accidentally deleted this from our outline, and I was like, I don't have time to go back and listen to this.
Maybe we need to do that every year to give the good vibes. The other part I found interesting that all the over-unders, again, we did this as close to the start of the preseason we possibly could.
Yep.
All of the over-unders, except for the Texans, have more or less been decided if you pick the DraftKings standard operating numbers that were given out at that time period. That we are at week 17 and that there is only one up for discussion is really interesting to me. And I think it speaks a lot to what everyone's talked about the past couple weeks, the dramatic parity between the league. There are multiple teams with 14-3 records. One's going to be a 5 seed here, regardless of the outcome come Sunday night with the Lions and Vikings, and so many teams competing for the number one pick at the bottom. I knew that was going to be the case entering the year, and I still dramatically flubbed the over-under calls for a lot of these. You crushed it again. So theoretically, you could finish 28-4 because I'm allowing you to be correct on the over on the Commanders, since I selfishly talked you out of that. There was even a board bet.
But hey, even if it's 26-6, even if we don't count the Commanders one that you turned me on, and even if the Texans, what do they have to lose?
If the Texans were to lose, then your bet does not hit.
Okay, so even in the case where I'm 24 or 26-6. That's phenomenal.
Yes.
That is that it doesn't get better than that. If anyone's got an expert that matched it this year, I'd like to see him.
I would too.
Because that Well, I remember going into this this show this year, I was like, we've been kind of so for a couple years. How long are we going to keep doing this? I think this just bought me a ticket to do it for the next 10 years. So we're going to take it.
This is bragging rights. I mean, this is bragging rights in a company that cares about sports as much as we do. This is one of the be-all, end-all bragging right things that you will be able to have at every company party, every outcome where somebody's questioning your NFL knowledge. You could say, hey, I have video proof. I've documented audio proof here of at least going at minimum 26-6 against every team's over-under to start the year. It's an incredible call. You had a great year fantasy-wise. And obviously, everyone thanks for listening to us and the RotoWire Network overall. I know we have a lot more podcasts here, at least for the end of Week 18. There will be playoff podcasts as well if you're doing those leagues. We'll have off-season podcasts probably start very shortly. Hopefully I'll be a part of that. Nick and I did a fantastic job, I think, throughout the off-season, and it really helped me prep-wise getting to this point of the year. And I appreciate all the listeners. Again, we got over 300 live viewers right now in a podcast that frankly doesn't matter. So maybe it's just because they enjoy listening to us, Jake. I'm not sure what it is, but
yeah, that's it. I mean, I just want to echo that. Thanks to listeners that have supported all year. This show, the overall show, in particular this episode, has shown tremendous growth, and that's thanks to you guys all out there. The chat this year has been more active than it ever has been before. The download numbers, even with some Apple algorithm adjustments, we're doing all right. So, appreciate everyone out there listening to us, and hopefully I helped you make some money this year. It'd have been tough to go throw big wads after how I'd done the couple years before, but we'll take a year like this any time, and man, it's been awesome. And maybe you don't want to do the off season show. Maybe taking a couple months off to think about nothing but college basketball, what I'm about to do, is the right move here, and then to just kind of catch up on my Vegas flight to see what happened this off season has been my MO for the show for the last.
Seems to be working for you, for sure.
We got something going here, but thanks again to everyone for tuning in all year long.
Yeah, again, I can't say it enough for all the listeners that are watching with us live, the YouTube side of things. I think Alan Sazowski and Mason have done a fantastic job producing us, making us look way better, sound way better than we have ever at any point at the nearly 6 years that we've been doing the show together, Jake, and it's obviously been fantastic to be working with you. I owe you plenty of money, whether it be our Kamani Vidal, Gus Edwards bet. There was an over-under bet that I also got wrong. There'll be a nice Culver's gift card in your desk area at some point in the near future as well too. And it was a joy to do this with you. You've done basically all the prep for the podcast at every point.
Don't discount the post-production work. Finding timestamps is something that I can't stand, but the reason we have timestamps on the show is Joe right here.
Well, again, I appreciate everyone, and obviously, hopefully, everyone had a great end of the fantasy season. Thank you for joining us throughout this entire journey, and we'll be back in at some point in July, hopefully, to get Jake's 32 of 32 correct picks on the over/under. But fantastic year overall for you, Jake, and thanks everyone again for listening.